Hi there, happy Monday. I'm Mary, the manager of the Claremont Branch Library, and it is time for our reading of The Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I hope you had a good weekend and weren't too worried about where we left our friends on Friday. They were left in a little bit of a predicament. If you remember, on Friday, our friends finally made it to the Emerald City, made it into their city fine without any problems, even made it to the palace, where they made it to the throne room and saw that General Ginger had called herself queen and dethroned the Scarecrow. As the friends were surrounded by General Ginger's army of revolt in the palace, the Scarecrow let out the mice that he had been carrying in his stuffing and scared all the people in the army, including General Ginger, who ran out of the palace. But they surrounded the palace so that our friends couldn't leave. So the Scarecrow thought of a way to try and get them out. And what he thought up was that they should build a flying machine and fly from the top of the palace to get out. Now, we ended the chapter with the friends going to find items to build this flying machine. And that's where we're going to pick up today with our chapter. So let's see what the friends found create this flying machine, and perhaps we'll meet a new friend. This chapter is called The Astonishing Flight of the Gump. When the adventurers reassembled upon the roof, it was found that a remarkably queer assortment of articles had been selected by the various members of the party. No one seemed to have a very clear idea of what was required, but all had brought something. The Wogglebug had taken from its position over the mantelpiece in the great hallway the head of a gump, which was adorned with wide-spreading antlers, and this, with great care and greater difficulty, the insect had carried up the stairs to the roof. This gump resembled an elk's head, only the nose turned upward in a saucy manner, and there were whiskers upon its chin, like those of a billy goat. Why the Wogglebug selected this article he could not have explained, except that it had aroused his curiosity. Tip, with the aid of the sawhorse, had brought a large upholstered sofa to the roof. It was an old-fashioned piece of furniture, with high back ends, and it was so heavy that even by resting the greatest weight upon the back of the sawhorse, the boy found himself out of breath when at last the clumsy sofa was dumped upon the roof. The Pumpkinhead had brought a broom, which was the first thing he saw. The Scarecrow arrived with a coil of clotheslines and ropes which he had taken from the courtyard, and in his trip up the stairs he had become so entangled in the loose ends of the ropes that both he and his burden tumbled in a heap upon the roof, and might have rolled off if Tip had not rescued him. The Tin Woodman appeared last. He also had been to the courtyard, where he had cut 4 great spreading leaves from a huge palm tree that was the pride of all the inhabitants of the Emerald City. "My dear Nick," exclaimed the Scarecrow, seeing what his friend had done, "you have been guilty of the greatest crime any person can commit in the Emerald City. If I remember rightly, the penalty for chopping leaves from the royal palm tree is to be killed 7 times, and afterward imprisoned for life." "It cannot be helped now," answered the Tin Woodman, throwing down the big leaves upon the roof, "but it may be one more reason why it is necessary for us to escape. And now let us see what you have found for me to work with." Many were the doubtful looks cast upon the heaps of miscellaneous material that now cluttered the roof, and finally the Scarecrow shook his head and remarked, "Well, if friend Nick can manufacture from this mess of rubbish a thing that will fly through the air and carry us to safety, then I will acknowledge him to be a better mechanic than I suspected." But the Tin Woodman seemed at first by no means sure of his powers, and only after polishing his forehead vigorously with the chamois leather did he resolve to undertake the task. "The first thing required for the machine," he said, "is a body big enough to carry the entire party. This sofa is the biggest thing we have, and might be used for a body. But should the machine ever tip sideways, we would all slide off and fall to the ground. Why not use 2 sofas? Asked Tip. There's another one just like it downstairs. This is a very sensible suggestion, exclaimed the Tin Woodman. You must fetch the other sofa at once. So Tip and the Sawhorse managed, with much labor, to get the second sofa on the roof. And when the 2 were placed together, edge to edge, the backs and ends formed a protecting rampart all around the seats. Excellent! Cried the Scarecrow. We can ride within this snug nest quite at our ease. The 2 sofas were now bound firmly together with ropes and clotheslines, and then Nick Chopper fastened the Gump's head to one end. That will show which is the front end of the thing, and he greatly pleased with his idea. And really, if you examine it critically, the Gump looks very well as a figurehead. These great palm leaves, for which I have endangered my life 7 times, must serve as wings. Are they strong enough? Asked the boy. They are as strong as anything we can get, answered the Woodman, and although they are not in proportion to the thing's body, we are not in a position to be very particular. So he fastened the palm leaves to the sofas, 2 on each side. Said the Wogglebug with considerable admiration, "The thing is now complete, and only needs to be brought to life." "Stop a moment!" exclaimed Jack. "Are you not going to use my broom?" "What for?" asked the Scarecrow. "Why, it can be fastened to the back end for a tail," answered the Pumpkinhead. "Surely you would not call the thing complete without a tail?" Said the Tin Woodman. "I do not see the use of a tail. We are not trying to copy a beast or a fish or a bird. All we ask of the thing is to carry us through the air. Perhaps, after the thing is brought to life, it can use a tail to steer with," suggested the Scarecrow. "For if it flies through the air, it will not be unlike a bird, and I've noticed that all birds have tails, which they use for a rudder while flying." "Very well," answered Nick. "The broom shall be used for a tail," and he fastened it firmly to the back end of the sofa body. Tip took the pepper box from his pocket. "The thing looks very big," he said anxiously, "and I'm not sure there is enough powder left to bring all of it to life. But I'll make it go as far as possible." "Put most on the wings," said Nick Chopper, "for they must be made as strong as possible." "And don't forget the head," exclaimed the Wogglebug. "Or the tail," added Jack Pumpkinhead. "Do be quiet," said Tip nervously. "You must give me a chance to work the magic charm in the proper manner." Very carefully he began sprinkling the thing with the precious powder. Each of the 4 wings was first lightly covered with a layer, then the sofas were sprinkled, and the broom given a slight coating. "The head! The head! Don't, I beg of you, forget the head!" cried the Wogglebug excitedly. "There's only a little powder left," announced Tip, looking within the box, "and it seems to me it is more important to bring the legs of the sofa to life than the head." "Not so," decided the Scarecrow. "Everything must have a head to direct it, and since this creature is to fly and not walk, it is really unimportant whether its legs are alive or not." So Tip abided by this decision and sprinkled the Gump's head with the remainder of the powder. "Now," he said, "keep silence while I work the charm." Having heard old Mombi pronounce the magic words, and having also succeeded in bringing the Sawhorse to life, Tip did not hesitate an instant in speaking the 3 cabalistic words, each accompanied by the peculiar gesture of the hands. It was a grave and impressive ceremony. As he finished the incantation, the thing shuddered throughout its huge bulk. The Gump gave a screeching cry that is familiar to those animals, and then the 4 wings began flopping furiously. Tip managed to grasp a chimney, else he would have been blown off the roof by the terrible breeze raised by the wings. The Scarecrow, being light in weight, was caught up bodily and borne through the air until Tip luckily seized him by one leg and held him fast. The Wogglebug lay flat upon the roof and so escaped harm, and the Tin Woodman, whose weight of tin anchored him firmly, threw both arms around Jack Pumpkinhead and managed to save him. The Sawhorse toppled over upon his back and lay with his legs waving helplessly above him, And now, while all were struggling to recover themselves, the thing rose slowly from the roof and mounted into the air. "Here, come back!" cried Tip in a frightened voice, as he clung to the chimney with one hand and the Scarecrow with the other. "Come back at once, I command you!" It was now that the wisdom of the Scarecrow in bringing the head of the thing to life instead of the legs was proved beyond a doubt. For the Gump, already high in the air, turned its head at Tip's command and gradually circled around until it could view the roof of the palace. "Come back!" shouted the boy again, and the Gump obeyed, slowly and gracefully waving its four wings in the air until the thing had settled once more upon the roof and became still. In the Jackdaw's Nest. "This," said the Gump in a squeaky voice not at all proportioned to the size of its great body, "is the most novel experience I've ever heard of. The last thing I remember distinctly is walking through the forest and hearing a loud noise. Something probably killed me then, and it certainly ought to have been the end of me. Yet here I am, alive again, with four monstrous wings, and a body which I venture to say would make any respectable animal or fowl weep with shame to own. What does it all mean? Am I a Gump, or am I a Juggernaut?" The creature, as it spoke, wiggled its chin whiskers in a very comical manner. "You're just a thing," answered Tip, "with a Gump's head on it, and we have made you and brought you to life so that you may carry us through the air wherever we wish to go." "Very good," said the thing. "As I am not a Gump, I cannot have a Gump's pride or independent spirit, so I may as well become your servant as anything else. My only satisfaction is that I do not seem to have a very strong constitution, and am not likely to live long in a state of slavery." "Don't say that, I beg of you!" cried the Tin Woodman, whose excellent heart was strongly affected by this sad speech. "Are you not feeling well today?" "Oh, as for that," returned the Gump, "it is my first day of existence, so I cannot judge whether I am feeling well or ill." And it waved its broom tail to and fro in a pensive manner. "Come, come," said the Scarecrow kindly, "do try to be more cheerful and take life as you find it. We shall be kind masters, and will strive to render your existence as pleasant as possible. Are you willing to carry us through the air wherever we wish to go?" "Certainly," answered the Gump. "I greatly prefer to navigate the air, for should I travel on the earth and meet with one of my own species, my embarrassment would be something awful." "I can appreciate that," said the Tin Woodman sympathetically. "And yet," continued the thing, "when I carefully look you over, my masters, none of you seems to be constructed much more artistically than I am." "Appearances are deceitful," said the Wogglebug earnestly. "I am both highly magnified and thoroughly educated." "Indeed," murmured the Gump indifferently. "And my brains are considered remarkably rare specimens," added the Scarecrow proudly. "How strange," remarked the Gump. "Although I am of tin," said the Woodman, "I own a heart altogether the warmest and most admirable in all the world." "I'm delighted to hear it," replied the Gump with a slight cough. "My smile," said Jack Pumpkinhead, "is worthy your best attention. It is always the same." "Semper idem," explained the Wogglebug pompously, and the Gump turned to stare at him. "And I," declared the Sawhorse, filling in an awkward pause, "am only remarkable because I can't help it." "I am proud, indeed, to meet with such exceptional masters," said the Gump in a careless tone. "If I could but secure so complete an introduction to myself, I would be more than satisfied." "That will come in time," remarked the Scarecrow. "To know thyself is considered quite an accomplishment, which it has taken us, who are your elders, months to perfect. But now," he added, turning to the others, "let us get abroad and start upon our journey." "Where shall we go?" asked Tip, as he clambered to a seat on the sofas and assisted the Pumpkinhead to follow him. "In the South Country rules a very delightful queen called Glinda the Good, who I am sure will gladly receive us," said the Scarecrow, getting into the thing clumsily. "Let us go to her and ask her advice." "That is cleverly thought of," declared Nick Chopper. giving the Wogglebug a boost and then toppling the sawhorse into the rear end of the cushioned seats. "I know Glinda the Good, and believe she will prove a friend indeed." "Are we all ready to go?" asked the boy. "Yes," announced the Tin Woodman, seating himself beside the Scarecrow. "Then," said Tip, addressing the Gump, "be kind enough to fly with us southward, and do not go higher than to escape the houses and trees, for it makes me dizzy to be up so far." "All right," answered the Gump briefly. It flopped its 4 huge wings and rose slowly into the air, and then, while our little band of adventurers clung to the backs and sides of the sofas for support, the Gump turned towards the south and roared swiftly and majestically away. "The scenic effect from this altitude is marvelous," commenced the educated Wogglebug as they rode along. "Never mind the scenery," said the Scarecrow. "Hold on tight or you may get a tumble. The thing seems to rock badly." "It will be dark soon," said Tip, observing that the sun was low on the horizon. "Perhaps we should have waited until morning. I wonder if the Gump can fly at night." "I've been wondering that myself," returned the Gump quietly. "You see, this is a new experience to me. I have used legs that carried me swiftly over the ground, but now my legs feel as if they were asleep." "They are," said Tip. "We didn't bring them to life." "You're expected to fly," explained the Scarecrow, "not to walk." "We can walk ourselves," said the Wogglebug. "I begin to understand what is required of me," remarked the Gump, "so I will do my best to please you." And he flew on for a time in silence. Presently, Jack Pumpkinhead became uneasy. "I wonder if riding through the air is liable to spoil pumpkins," he said. "Not unless you carelessly drop your head over the side," answered the Wogglebug. "In that event, your head would no longer be a pumpkin, for it would become a squash." "Have I not asked you to restrain these unfeeling jokes?" demanded Tip, looking at the Wogglebug with a severe expression. "You have, and I've restrained a good many of them," replied the insect. "But there are opportunities for so many excellent puns in our language that, to an educated person like myself, the temptation to express them is almost irresistible." "People with more or less education discovered those puns centuries ago," said Tip. "Are you sure?" asked the Wogglebug with a startled look. "Of course I am," answered the boy. "An educated Wogglebug may be a new thing, but a Wogglebug education is as old as the hills, judging from the display you make of it." The insect seemed much impressed by this remark, and for a time maintained a meek silence. The Scarecrow, in shifting his seat, saw upon the cushions the pepper box which Tip had cast aside, and began to examine it. "Throw it overboard," said the boy. "It's quite empty now, and there's no use keeping it." "Is it really empty?" asked the Scarecrow, looking curiously into the box. "Of course it is," Tip answered. "I shook out every grain of the powder." "Then the box has 2 bottoms," announced the Scarecrow, "for the bottom on the inside is fully an inch away from the bottom on the outside." "Let me see," said the Tin Woodman, taking the box from his friend. "Yes," he declared after looking it over, "the thing certainly has a false bottom. Now, I wonder what that is for." "Can't you get it apart and find out?" inquired Tip, now quite interested with the mystery. "Why, yes, the lower bottom unscrews," said the Tin Woodman. "My fingers are rather stiff. Please, see if you can open it." He handed the pepper box to Tip, who had no difficulty in unscrewing the bottom, and in the cavity below were 3 silver pills, with a carefully folded paper lying underneath them. This paper the boy proceeded to unfold, taking care not to spill the pills, and found several lines clearly written in red ink. "Read it aloud," said the Scarecrow, so Tip read as follows: "Dr. Nicky Dick's celebrated wishing pills. Directions for use. Swallow 1 pill, count 17 by 2s, then make a wish. The wish will immediately be granted. Caution: keep in a dry and dark place." "Why, this is a very valuable discovery," cried the Scarecrow. "It is indeed," replied Tip gravely. "These pills may be of great use to us. I wonder if old Mombi knew where they were in the bottom of the box." I remember her saying that she got the powder of life from the same Mickey Dick. He must be a powerful sorcerer, exclaimed the Tin Woodman. And since the powder proved a success, we ought to have confidence in the pills. But how, asked the Scarecrow, can anyone count 17 by twos? 17 is an odd number. That is true, replied Tip, greatly disappointed. No one can possibly count 17 by twos. Then the pills are of no use to us, wailed the Pumpkinhead, and this fact overwhelms me with grief, for I had intended wishing that my head would never spoil. Nonsense, said the Scarecrow sharply. If we could use the pills at all, we would make far better wishes than that. I do not see how anything could be better, protested poor Jack. If you were liable to spoil at any time, you could understand my anxiety. For my part, said the Tin Woodman, I sympathize with you in every respect. But since we cannot count to 17 by twos, sympathy is all you're liable to get. By this time it had become quite dark, and the voyagers found above them a cloudy sky, through which the rays of the moon could not penetrate. The Gump flew steadily on, and for some reason the huge sofa body rocked more and more dizzily every hour. The Wogglebug declared he was seasick, and Tip was also pale and somewhat distressed, but the others clung to the backs of the sofas and did not seem to mind the motion, as long as they were not tipped out. The darker and darker grew the night, and on sped the Gump through the black heavens. The travelers could not even see one another, and an impressive silence settled down upon them. After a long time, Tip, who had been thinking deeply, spoke. "How are we to know when we come to the palace of Glenda the Good?" he asked. "It's a long way to Glenda's palace," answered the Woodman. "I've traveled it." "But how are we to know how fast the Gump is flying?" persisted the boy. "We cannot see a single thing down on the earth, and before morning we may be far beyond the palace we want to reach." "That is all true enough," the Scarecrow replied a little uneasily, "but I do not see how we can stop just now, for we might alight in a river or on the top of a steeple, and that would be a great disaster." So they permitted the Gump to fly on, with regular flops of its great wings, and waited patiently for morning. Then Tip's fears were proven to be well founded, for with the first streaks of gray dawn they looked over the sides of the sofas and discovered rolling plains dotted with queer villages, where the houses, instead of being dome-shaped, as they all are in the land of Oz, had slanting roofs that rose to a peak in the center. Odd-looking animals were also moving about upon the open plains, and the country was unfamiliar to both the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow, who had formerly visited Glenda the Good's domain and knew it well. "We are lost," said the Scarecrow dolefully. "The Gump must have carried us entirely out of the land of Oz and over the sandy deserts and into the terrible outside world that Dorothy told us about." "We must get back," exclaimed the Tin Woodman earnestly. "We must get back as soon as possible." "Turn around," cried Tip to the Gump. "Turn as quickly as you can." "If I do, I shall upset," answered the Gump. "I'm not at all used to flying, and the best plan would be for me to alight in some place, and then I can turn around and take a fresh start." Just then, however, there seemed to be no stopping place that would answer their purpose. They flew over a village so big that the Wogglebug declared it was a city, and then they came to a range of high mountains, with many deep gorges and steep cliffs showing plainly. "Now is our chance to stop," said the boy, finding that they were very close to the mountain tops. Then he turned to the Gump and commanded, "Stop at the first level place you see." "Very well," answered the Gump, and settled down upon the table of rock that stood between the two cliffs. But not being experienced in such matters, the Gump did not judge his speed correctly, and instead of coming to stop upon the flat rock, he missed it by half the width of his body, breaking off both his right wings against the sharp edge of the rock, and then tumbling over and over down the cliff. Our friends held on to the sofa as long as they could, but when the Gump caught on a projecting rock, the thing stopped suddenly, bottom side up, and all were immediately dumped out. By good fortune, they fell only a few feet, for underneath them was a monster nest built by a colony of jackdaws in a hollow ledge of the rock. So none of them, not even the Pumpkinhead, was injured by the fall. For Jack found his precious head resting on the soft breast of the Scarecrow, which made an excellent cushion. And Tip fell on a mass of leaves and papers, which saved him from injury. The Wogglebug had bumped his round head against the sawhorse, but without causing him more than a moment's inconvenience. The Tin Woodman was at first much alarmed, but finding he had escaped without even a scratch upon his beautiful nickel plate, he at once regained his accustomed cheerfulness and turned to address his comrades. "Our journey has ended rather suddenly," he said, "and we cannot justly blame our friend the Gump for our accident, because he did the best he could under the circumstances. But how are we ever to escape from this nest I must leave to someone with better brains than I possess." Here he gazed at the Scarecrow, who crawled to the edge of the nest and looked over. Below them was a sheer precipice several hundred feet in depth. Above them was a smooth cliff unbroken save by the point of the rock where the wrecked body of the Gump still hung suspended from the end of one of the sofas. There really seemed to be no means of escape, and as they realized their helpless plight, the little band of adventurers gave way to their bewilderment. "This is a worse prison than the palace," sadly remarked the Wogglebug. "I wish we had stayed there," moaned Jack. "I'm afraid the mountain air isn't good for pumpkins." "It won't be when the jackdaws come back," growled the sawhorse, which lay waving its legs in vain endeavor to get up upon its feet again. "Jackdaws are especially fond of pumpkins." "Do you think the birds will come here?" asked Jack, much distressed. "Of course they will," said Tip, "for this is their nest, and there must be hundreds of them," he continued, "for see what a lot of things they have brought here." Indeed, the nest was half filled with a most curious collection of small articles for which the birds could have no use, but which the thieving jackdaws had stolen during many years from the homes of men. And as the nest was safely hidden where no human being could reach it, this lost property would never be recovered. The Wogglebug, searching among the rubbish, for the jackdaws stole useless things as well as valuable ones, turned up with his foot a beautiful diamond necklace. This was so greatly admired by the Tin Woodman that the Wogglebug presented it to him with a graceful speech, after which the Woodman hung it around his neck with much pride, rejoicing exceedingly when the big diamonds glittered in the sun's rays. But now they heard a great jabbering and flopping of wings, and as the sound grew nearer to them, Tip exclaimed, "The jackdaws are coming, and if they find us here they will surely kill us in their anger." "I was afraid of this," moaned the Pumpkinhead. "My time has come." "And mine also," said the Wogglebug, "for jackdaws are the greatest enemies of my race." The others were not at all afraid, but the Scarecrow at once decided to save those of the party who were liable to be injured by the angry birds. So he commanded Tip to take off Jack's head and lie down with it in the bottom of the nest, and when this was done, he ordered the Wogglebug to lie beside Tip. Nick Chopper, who knew from past experience just what to do, then took the Scarecrow to pieces, all except his head, and scattered the straw over Tip and the Wogglebug, completely covering their bodies. Hardly had this been accomplished when the flock of jackdaws reached them. Perceiving the intruders in their nest, the birds flew down upon them with screams of rage. And that is where we end today. So I hope that leaves you excited for tomorrow to find out what will happen to our friends as they are attacked by the jackdaws, if they will even find a way back to Glenda and get some help for the Scarecrow. We will be finishing our reading this Thursday, so we're almost at the end of the book. I hope you're enjoying it, and please come back tomorrow to find out what happens to our friends in the jackdaw's nest. Have a good rest of your day.